Hi, Jim here, just dropping in before this week's episode to tell you about my latest movie, The Apocalypse Box. It's a horror film and I'd love for you to check it out. If you go to apocalypsebox.co.uk, you can find all the links on where you can watch the movie. Right, let's get on with this week's episode. Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week, I'm speaking to founder of the Independent Horror Society and filmmaker Chris Nials. Chris started the Independent Horror Society in London as a way for horror lovers to get together and watch horror movies. It quickly transformed and became more of a hub for filmmakers, people who love horror to connect with the horror creators. Chris is also a producer, having worked on a bunch of short films and also having recently released Walking Against the Rain. I talked to Chris about the Independent Horror Society. We chatted about his feature film. It was funded through SEIS, the scheme in the UK. So it was good to quiz him about that and find out some of the pitfalls and some of his tips if you're thinking of doing that yourself. We also talked about the feature film, the sales and distribution process. He says he's got a good sales agent, which is something you don't often hear. So it's great to quiz him about that. He's also a professional marketeer. So it was great to get his tips on how to promote your film. Enjoy. As I start with most people, tell me about your route into the industry.
Funnily enough, I've never had any sort of formal training in film. I never studied anything with relation to film or film studies at university. I basically found my way in through starting the Independent Horror Society, or the London Horror Society as it was at the time. I essentially started that because none of my friends wanted to watch horror movies, and I wanted to find more people to do that with.
They don't sound like good friends.
Exactly, that's right. I've told them that many times. They still talk to me roughly. And from there, I found far more people, obviously, that enjoyed horror. But the interesting thing is that I never really sort of knew that independent film was a thing until I started meeting more people through the society. And from there, I mean, my background's always been in marketing, and meeting these people that put their time and their own money into making these really awesome horror projects that just kind of took my sort of breath away, really, in a kind of a weird way. It's like, wow, you can make these cool things on your own. You don't need millions of pounds doing it. That's really, really cool. And I knew I wanted to kind of get involved in that, but again, having had no formal training, I knew I couldn't hold a camera. I couldn't be any good there. I couldn't direct. I certainly couldn't write. So I thought maybe there's something I can maybe do in marketing and promotion, and sort of really fell into it from there, really. And then from there, just sort of started learning a little bit more about how the production process works in the independent sector, and then fell into producing. And here I am now, probably 5 or 6 years down the line, and sort of haven't really looked back, really. Something I really love doing, and it's been a hell of a ride. A lot of fun, though.
Lovely, lovely. And all right, so let's look back. What's the main thing that you would like to have told yourself when you started your producing career?
That is such a great question. It's the beauty of the benefit of hindsight, and you can actually answer this now. I think I've always suffered with sort of imposter syndrome. I think there's always that temptation when you're just starting out to think that there's no value I can really add somewhere. Like I said, I think with anything involving film, you see people operating at the top of their very game, right? And you think, well, hang on a minute, if someone's doing that, how can I even, as someone that's just starting out, even hope to emulate that? But I think what I've found over time is that actually, no matter sort of what size, but particularly in the smaller scale of the budgets, actually just having somebody with a particular skill set to come on board, if you're good at something, I mean, everybody's good at something, right, at one particular thing, and actually maybe that could provide value on a film set somewhere, even if it's something like, I mean, marketing. I mean, when the hell, I would never have thought that would have been value, but actually, further down the line on a film project, it actually does. So I think I would have just told myself, hey, look, no matter what you've got, it might actually be able to provide value to something. And I think that's something we always look to sort of pass down to people maybe just starting out in their career, where it's like, actually, look, maybe you don't have the sort of this, like you said, that kind of the deep skill set to maybe be a DOP or something like that from the off. I mean, that's something that's probably not very achievable. But actually, look, if you're just passionate, be a safe pair of hands on set, being a runner or someone like that. I mean, it's when you can't pay huge salaries to people on indie film sets, people that are just keen to get involved and lend a hand and be, like I said, a safe pair of hands and reliable are worth their weight in gold. So I think it's, just I wish I'd started earlier. Maybe I think is one of those. So it's like, but again, it would have always been that. Well, what can I really add? And actually, the reality is, well, you can probably add a lot. You just maybe don't know it at the time. So
yeah, definitely. And I will come on to the marketing side because it is a huge part of producing and releasing a film, especially with sort of self-distribution now. So we'll definitely talk about that. So the Independent Horror Society started as we all love horror films, want to talk about horror films. At what point did you go, all right, this is now becoming more about making stuff?
yeah, it was quicker than I thought it certainly would have been. Like I said, as I went into it, not knowing much about that world. So I would say it was probably in the sort of the first couple of years where we started showing other people's stuff as opposed to just organizing trips to the cinema or watching other people's films that have come out of studios, have been those sort of big budget releases that you'd go to the cinema to see anyway. And yeah, once we started screening them, certainly I started meeting more people that were actually making those films. And like I said, it's through those relationships really that I personally started making stuff with other people. But the society itself, I mean, we've never actually made something as a society. It's something we're sort of maybe looking at doing further down the line. We typically try and focus now. I mean, there's sort of really sort of three strands to what we do. I mean, our main aim is to really support the creation of indie horror projects, no matter if they're film, whether they're writing, whether they're, even kind of almost installation art stuff. If there's anything to do with horror in it, it's such an under-supported industry. For any sort of independent media is woefully under-supported. So that's what we're here for. We're here to sort of laud that, and we do that really in three ways. I mean, the first is that we look to kind of unite people, bring people together to collaborate on stuff. That's certainly one of the things where we look at, if we quote unquote make stuff, it's bringing those people together within the society to work together and to it goes back to a little bit what I was saying earlier. It's kind of finding those people that think they might be able to add something and kind of almost mushing them together with other people that they could kind of maybe work with and see great things flourish. That's one of the things that we do. The second is we look to nurture careers as well with people. We're very, very lucky to have some really experienced pros within the society as well that are so generous with their sharing of knowledge and sharing of experience. And we can look to sort of harness that and help people kind of build from maybe a fledgling camera operator to, like I said, a DOP. That's something we really sort of focus on as well. And the last thing we do is, I think probably the most important thing, is merge fans with creators. Because for us, I mean, again, we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but it's so important, I think, for a creator to speak to their fans, right, or speak to fans of the genre, because they're the people that are going to actually kind of, and it's such a horrible term, but consume your product, right? I mean, they're going to be sort of buying what you create. And I think having that kind of relationship and that discord between fans and creators is incredibly important. And we're very much leaning into that at the moment, especially with our new creators fund that we launched. I mean, that's something that where we give £1,000 grants to creators of horror, but it's all voted on by IHS members, of which there are many, many fans in there. And it's just something we're looking to really push, that kind of, like I said, that fan creator discord, because it is so important. So yeah, where we don't necessarily produce or create stuff as a society at large, it's almost kind of even better than that for us, because there's so much kind of going on that we've sort of helped introduce to that. So yeah, lots of fun projects going on under our roof, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, so where I came across you was your speed pitching
Sure.
networking session, and I'd never done one of those online before.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done the baptism of fire of having to do it in person, and I hate that anyway. Or I'm a bit better at it now, but used to be terrible at it and hated it. And I'd say, if you're the sort of person who does find networking and all that kind of stuff difficult, an online version is so much easier,
Mm,
and feels so much more supportive because you're getting to talk about yourself for a little while, and then
mm.
you're getting comments in the chat of people going, "Oh, that's brilliant, love that. Here's my email." I was really impressed with how good all the pitches were and how sort of everyone was so supportive of each other. So I'd say
Yeah.
definitely if you want a little bit of practice even at pitching, and I tell you what, talking of pitching then. So what for you? What are your tips on pitching as a marketeer? How do you do it?
I think it's just be honest. I think there's always a temptation with pitching that you must kind of project yourself as this all-knowing, perfect person in terms of what you're actually trying to pitch people to do. And I think that kind of almost it's inherently this is going to sound really wanky and pretentious, but it's almost inherently kind of inhuman to do that because everybody knows. And if you sort of inject personality in your pitch and just sort of show people what you're about, what the what project you're working on, if you can kind of show passion behind that, I think that's such an important thing. And you don't need to be an A1 pitcher that does it day in day out to do that. And I think that's sort of one of the beauties of like you mentioned with speed pitching is that we try and create that free and easy environment where we're not looking for incredibly polished pitches. We're just looking for you to tell us about your stuff you're working on, because when you kind of get people just talking free and easy about what they're working on, that's where you really learn about what maybe a project somebody's actually working on. So I think, yeah, one massive piece of advice is just, I'm not saying don't prepare. I think it's always important to have your kind of the main beats of what you're wanting to talk about in a pitch lined out, but make it sort of more interactive with sort of necessarily who you're actually sort of pitching to. If it's one to one, maybe try and do it in a way where you invite some questions back and start that back and forth. I think as soon as you can do that, that's infinitely a better pitch because you get the buy-in from the other party. But yeah, if you're sort of pitching to a room, just just be yourself. And it might sound a little bit trite to say that, but I really think it's just so important that if people can kind of see the real you behind the project. I think when it comes to if you're sort of pitching to sort of maybe find someone to work with, or even if it's sort of financial, you've got to have a connection with whoever's kind of taking you up on the offer of whatever you're pitching for. You've got to have that connection, and I think there has to be that kind of personal relationship rather than just a professional relationship before any kind of kind of almost commercial transaction, if you can call it that, takes place. So yeah, just try and remember that it doesn't have to be sort of perfectly polished at the time. You can always kind of have further conversations, but if your first pitch, just make sure that you're kind of being true to yourself really in what you're actually pitching, and just remember that so much of it is based on who you are. And you're never going to appeal to everybody, but that's 100% fine and 100% normal. So it's just important to lean into to yourself and make sure you're kind of conveying your true personality, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say the other thing is from getting the opportunity to watch other people pitch is really good because it helps you. Oh, okay, that's how they do it. That's how they do it. And you realise, hang on a minute, no one here is embarrassed. This is just, they're just talking about the thing that they love. My tips would be to try to get to the point as quickly as possible. And also there's got to be a hook, or there's got to be a moment in that pitch where someone goes, so your story connects, or it kind of, something happens. There was a couple the other night when someone says something, I had that moment. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that moment, and I'll remember that pitch because of it.
Yeah.
So it looks like on your IMDb, you've been through, you've done a bunch of shorts, done a feature film that's on Prime, and you've done crowdfunding. I can see from a couple of projects. So let's talk about that. So what's your experience been like with crowdfunding?
Crowdfunding is incredibly hard. I think it's one of those when it first started. I was almost going to say 5 years ago now, but it obviously wasn't. It was like 15 years ago when it first became a thing, which is something I don't ever want to get into. But yeah, it's incredibly hard. I'm really lucky. So my production partner, a guy called Scott Lias, who run a production company called Crossroad Pictures, he is incredible at crowdfunding. But it's a slog. It's really horrendous to do if you're in any way sort of, let's say, thin-skinned. I mean, it's it's one of those things where you just, if it's going to succeed, you have to be posting about it on social media every day. You have to be kind of bothering friends and family, not necessarily for money, but for likes and shares. And that can, I mean, for me personally, for sure, it can really grate on people to do that, and completely understand, completely get it. But, in order to feed, and again, I'm spouting horrible phrases today, and I apologize, but in order to feed the algorithm on, on the crowdfunding platforms, you've got to have not necessarily pledges and money coming in, but you've got to have eyes on your page. You've got to have people interacting with it. So I think it's something we've kind of learned how to do over time. And like I said, I'm not professing to be an expert. I'm very lucky to have someone who is working with me, driving those campaigns. But it's something that's never nice. It's something that's incredibly hard work, and it's all about trying to find, every day you've essentially got to think of 3 new things to talk about your project, because if you're posting, say, morning, afternoon, and evening, it's 3 new things across platforms that you've got to talk about. And some people do it really nicely, and they lean into the fact that they don't sort of really want to be doing it, and they know they're being a massive pain to friends and family. So you see the techniques of, like, if we get up to X amount of pledges by the end of the day, we won't be talking about this project for another couple of years. And it's all about kind of finding your own angle, and I wouldn't say finding your comfort zone, because I think you just have to push on through and leave your comfort zone really to do it. I mean, but it's the whole crowdfunding landscape has changed so much in terms of, it used to be about trying to kind of create a project that strangers would find on whatever platform you were funding through, to try and actually kind of get strangers who are just casually looking through these platforms to find stuff to back. And it really sort of doesn't really work like that anymore. I mean, it's all about trying to kind of find people within your network, or people who might know you through other people, to do it. I mean, when we were sort of funding 5-6 years ago for projects, we were able to find strangers who found us and was like, oh, hey, this sounds really, really great. We'll put some money into that. But with the last project we crowdfunded for, a film called Santa's Little Helper, we managed to do, we did pretty well in terms of getting ourselves seen on the platform. I think we were a Kickstarter pick, which is always a great thing to have. I think we were the number 1 rated film project in the country on the platform, and we were number 3 in the world, I think, at one point. So in terms of feeding that algorithm, getting to the kind of the scape where people are actually seeing your project that you don't know, I think we had 2 pledges come in from people we didn't know. So it's such a tricky thing to do. But I think if you do it sensibly, and if you do it carefully, and you really create a proper strategy for what you're doing, it can work. I mean, there are some people, especially in horror, there is that kind of core audience that will put money in because they just love horror, and it's such a brilliant audience to try and harness. And again, it almost goes back to pitching, right? I think if you can do it in a way where you get people to buy into your project and I think that's probably the most important thing, because if you think about it, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of horror projects that are on there. So what is it you can do to try and stand yourself up against the rest? And there is, if you can inject personality, if you can put, within marketing these days, it's so important to put a human face to stuff. And that's absolutely the case with filmmaking as well, which is why we put our filmmakers front and center of the campaigns around it, because it really does help people buy into, what you're doing. You're not putting money into a project, you're putting your money behind somebody. And I think that's kind of an infinitely more powerful strategy to do it. And that sort of has seen us right, really, for the last few we've managed to do.
Right. Okay. Good advice. Good advice. And have all your projects gone crowdfunding, or have you had any other kind of finance routes?
No. So the shorts mainly, yes. With the feature, we did a pre-production round for through crowdfunding, which we managed to achieve, and that certainly helped us on the way. But yeah, that was sort of a slightly bigger budget feature than we were used to. So we did that through some the usual kind of the tax routes that you try and do to try and make it as efficient for investors to invest in. So we were lucky enough to be approved for the SEIS scheme. I won't bore you with the details of the tax implications around that, but essentially it makes it far more attractive for for a high net worth person to invest in your company rather than a film which kind of carries some weight. So yeah, it was to raise the money for that was a combination of SEIS related funding, some pre-production crowdfunding, and personal investment and loans. So it was by hook or by crook we were going to make that film, and I think it was we just decided it's like, look, we've got to make this, because if we don't, it's not going to happen. So we're going to have to just put this together. We weren't helped by the fact that we had one sort of investor that was making quite a sizable donation pre-COVID, and then COVID happened and that all fell through. So we had to sort of completely kind of redo the production from a much lower budget perspective and go again, which obviously made things a lot harder. But I think, again, I mean, it was a combination of sort of blood, sweat and tears just to sort of get us through that, and to get us, it was almost staged. It was like, okay, so if we get this amount of money, we can get the equipment sorted or get the location sorted, and if we get to that point, we can go and shoot and we can pay everybody. And then it was almost staged. So we kind of got through production and we were like, okay, cool. So we're there. We haven't got any money for post. What do we do? So then it was we could raise some more money through investment, and then obviously we had the tax credit at the time that you could then go and apply for. So that essentially paid through post. So as always with any indie film producer that's working on features, it's a case of, it's never that plain sailing of, okay, so our budget's, well, I don't know, £100,000 and let's get that £100,000 and away we go. It's never like that. It's you're pulling in things from multiple angles and just trying to kind of get it through to a stage where it's like, okay, right, it's done, and then comes selling. But I mean, that's another story entirely.
Yeah, another nightmare.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to one more thing on that SEIS funding, is there any pitfalls of that, or any things you wish you'd known going into that process?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, I think it's one of those things where I would almost advise you don't do it alone. I mean, we were very lucky that we had a very good accountant on side that could help us through that process, because it's not just the kind of the benefits of doing it are quite simple. I mean, it's essentially you're applying to the government with a business plan that then they approve, and if they approve you, you're able to raise money from high net worth people. So the process there is quite simple, but it's just knowing essentially how to fill out the forms, knowing or having some input into what the government might be looking for in a business plan as well. I mean, it was probably the best few £100 we spent on getting an accountant to sort of help us with that. And it goes the same. I mean, essentially, because you're kind of dealing with tax and other people's income tax. I mean, you're obviously not touching any people's returns or anything like that, but it has to be done absolutely by the book. And I think when it comes to that, I mean, I think there's some stages or there's some parts of filmmaking where you absolutely have to leave it to a proper professional. And that side of it, anything to do with money and government related money and government related schemes, it's like, for God's sake, make sure you pay someone who knows what they're doing, because it's just one of those things. If you get it wrong, I mean, you can try it will either hold you back or it will kind of get you thrown out of the scheme or anything like that. And it's just, there's a reason why people spend their lives being accountants. It's for stuff like that. So for me, it's like, let them get on with it. It's money well spent.
Good advice. Good sound advice. Get an accountant if you're going to go down that route.
Get an accountant, getting a lawyer. That's always
get
the
an
best
accountant
ones
and
to
a lawyer.
do.
Yeah, that's the other one. All the contracts.
So
then, obviously you've got the film now that's on. I think it's on Prime. The film that you've made. So talk to me about the sales and distribution process for that and what avenue you went down.
Yeah, so it was one of those where because it had been a long process of the script was written probably maybe 2.5, maybe 3 years before. I mean, that's when we were first sort of thinking about it, and had sort of gone through sort of numerous co-producers trying to get things up and running. And as always with these things, they run and run and run. And that's why we essentially sort of came to that point where it was like, we got so close with a bigger chunk of investment pre-COVID, and then that fell through. And it was really at that point where Scott and I both sort of sat down. We're like, well, it's now or never. We've just got to get this done. And I think in hindsight, I think, and my advice would always be just sort of seeing how the industry works, is that you've got to kind of create that sales strategy. You've got to be talking to distributors from script development stage, because if you can kind of get someone to work with you from either from a sales agency or a distributor at that point, it makes your journey incredibly easy, much easier, let's say, just because, you've got that kind of, if you can kind of get pre-sales committed, or if you can kind of sell it off spec just to kind of get that back end sorted. I mean, at least you're going to have a sort of a sellable product at the end of it. But because of obviously how because of our journey with Walking Against the Rain, didn't allow us to do that. We were kind of almost shooting in the dark, where it's like, hey, we've got this film made, now let's try and sell it. And we got a sales agent locked in reasonably soon afterwards. And I think, as always with these things, I mean, you get kind of horror stories about sales agents all around. And I think it's just, I mean, we didn't have that experience. I mean, ours were quite good, but it's just a very sort of slow process where, as a low budget film within any sales agency, there's always going to be sort of a hierarchy stuff. So it's, as a producer, it's your baby. You're like looking for stuff to be done left, right, and center very quickly. And it's just not how it works sometimes. So we had to learn to be kind of patient. We had to, we were very good at sort of standing our ground when deals were coming in. If they weren't right for us, we said. I think sometimes it can be kind of easy to fall into something that might not be right for you, but you can always fight your corner. And I think there's this image of sales agents sometimes where they're like, well, if you fight your corner, they're just going to kind of shelve you and that's it. And that's not the case. I mean, I think if you find the right one to work with, they understand, they know the situation, and they'll work with you to make sure that the release is right for you too, which is great. It should be a kind of a collaborative relationship with any kind of person in the distribution end to make sure that your film receives the right release for the film. And yeah, we got the US, or what they call the US and Canada, i.e. the quote unquote domestic rights, out reasonably quickly. That was released in the US, I think. It's probably about 18 months ago now, I think, really. And then it took a little bit longer to kind of get the other territories sorted out, which obviously included the UK. But we finally signed the rest of the deals for the remaining territories. Yeah, I think it was maybe 3 months ago, really. So it was on all the PVOD platforms for a little while, and then it's found its home on Amazon Prime now, and looking forward to seeing the first sales report come in for it. But let's see how it's done. But it's always great to see it come out in your home territory, man. I mean, that's always the most important thing. We've been so lucky to have so much support from like the UK indie horror community for our film, and that's what makes it special, is when it comes in and people can actually watch it. Because aside from obviously festival releases, not every fan can come to festivals and watch your film. So for some people, they've been backing the project for 3, 4, 5 years sometimes, and it's like, now you can watch it, which is nerve-wracking in its own right. It's like, God, I hope you're not disappointed. But I mean,
it's a long wait.
It is a long wait. So yeah, it's nice to kind of have it out there now, and just see what happens now.
So do you mind saying who your sales agent is? Because people will always go, oh, he's an honest sales agent. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we the company is called Taylor and Dodge, and they're based out of LA. So it was I'm not going to say it was a tricky relationship at all, because the only sort of downside was the agent that signed us for that and then went on and joined another agency, and
right.
So we remained on the books. So there was always a transition period, but no, they were good. I mean, communication is always such an important thing there, and I think all you want from your sales agent is honest conversation, and rather than oh, hey, we're going to try and do this, we're going to do that, and those overpromising sides. I mean, there was less of that than I think what we've seen sometimes with others. I mean, being our first commercial feature, we were kind of relying on much like what I'm sure people listen to this, they go to the usual sources and try and learn about what to sort of do from sales agencies, and or what to try and get them to do. And it's one of those things where until you're in that situation and until you're talking to them, again, it's like any relationship within this industry. You can find those ones that work for you. They're not bad guys. You've got to understand that they're in it to make money. So you've got to kind of, with any kind of back end point of the filmmaking process, you've got to. I think a lot of people, sometimes go into it thinking, oh, but this is my film, it's my baby, and I just want it to be right. You've got to realize that it's a money making machine, right? And you're going to be kind of a cog in that machine. And I think if as soon as you kind of get that into it, it makes many conversations a lot easier. And I think, it's just find the one that's right for you. I mean, I think we were very lucky to have had a reasonable festival release for it, which we did quite well at Fright Fest and some other big festivals around the world. So we had that kind of platform where sales agents were actually willing to talk to us, which is sometimes quite a tricky thing to do. So we spoke to a few and we picked T&D and yeah, they've done well for us.
Cool. And last question on this, and I can absolutely cut this bit if you don't want to say it. So last question on this would be, have you seen any money from them yet? Or are you still paying off marketing and sales fees?
So we negotiated as part of our deal basically like a corridor. So we had a small MG, which was really, really great from the distributor. We saw that. So we managed to negotiate in, and this is always worth kind of asking for these things where, you can't be naive where you sort of think, okay, well, zero marketing costs, please. Let's kind of get all our money in first. It is never going to work because, again, they need to make money as well, right? I mean, and again, it's that realization. But we did manage to negotiate a small corridor in there where it was like, hey, look, we need to see some comeback. Can we sort of do it almost pari passu, where for the first few £1,000s just to come in so we can have something, can we take that alongside paying your marketing budget, and then we'll do that again? So that's actually what we got in the end, which is, like I said, something that can be negotiated. I mean, again, some sales agents might go for it, some won't. And it's, some producers like to kind of get all the marketing out of the way first, just so they can kind of get that cleared, and then everything's, for them after that. So it's all about kind of figuring out what you want from it from a producer standpoint, and then finding the right agent and finding the right deal to sort of try and push that through. But not every strategy is right for everyone. So again, it's important to find the right person for you that, you can have these conversations right at the very start before you sign with anyone. And then, it can, that open and honest discourse from both ends is so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say maybe it's even worth asking that question just to see how they react.
100%. Yeah.
Then who you're dealing with, and if it's a sort of genuine business relationship, or if it's, whoa, hang on a minute, money up front,
exactly.
Exactly. Tell from that.
Well, that's it. And I think, again, sales agents do have a bad reputation, and that's because there are some bad apples in that, but there are across the entire industry, right? I mean, there's no place is safe. There are bad producers in there as well, and we all get tarnished with that brush sometimes. But like I said, they're there to make money, and I think if you're trying to kind of almost meet them on their terms, where it's like, look, you can't kind of almost expect them to kind of shoulder all the risk on a release. That's unless you've got like an incredible project where it's smashed all kind of. Audiences loved it and it's a big hit, then you can kind of start to be a little more kind of choosy, and you can kind of get people bidding against each other, and that's obviously where you can win there. But if it's let's say a regular release, you have to maybe sort of you need to know that you need to maybe play the game or really kind of find that sort of relationship where both grounds are met. But you have to realize, like I said, that they need something on their end. But there's always, again, it's so important to find the right person to work with, because it can make a difference. And I think even just having that right relationship can help you get the deals that are right for you. And I think if you know that the person there is fighting your corner with the distributors to get those right deals for you, it does make the relationship so much easier.
I'll put a link to Walking Against the Rain in the
great. Thank you.
Description, so people can check the movie out. I'm sure they'll be interested to see it. So then marketing, you got your marketing hat on. very difficult phase for filmmakers because you've got to go out there and you've got to get people to watch your movie.
Mm-hmm.
So give me some tips for that. What's your advice?
It start as early as you possibly can. So I think at the top, I probably bleated about the importance of bringing fans and creators together, and that's really where it starts for me. I think it's not the situation where you should be kind of clearing your ideas with with everyone first to kind of get 100% approval from every fan you speak to go and make a project. But I think it's important to, when you're sort of developing, even when you're in the sort of the script development stage, you've got to kind of have an eye on the audience, because they're the people that are going to be buying your product. And look, again, it sounds kind of a bit almost kind of business like, right? But what you're producing is a product. I mean, you're kind of asking for sometimes hundreds, thousands, if not millions of pounds worth of investment from people. If people are putting that money in, it's your kind of your fiscal responsibility almost to make sure that you're using that money wisely, or kind of creating something where you think there's a good chance of making them their money back and maybe a bit more. That's the aim, right? And I think in order to do that, whatever business you're in, the first thing you need to do when launching a new product is know your market. And I think that's sometimes something that's overlooked, where people can kind of get incredibly excited by a script that's written, and it can be an incredible script. But if it's something that's kind of harder to market, particularly in the horror genre, it can be something that can kind of lead you down a bit of a kind of a risky path, where you can make something, you might be able to get some money for it, get it made, but then it's nobody wants to buy it. And I think, yeah, that's why it's important to kind of go with that mindset from that development stage. Now, with things like horror, I mean, it's kind of the perfect breeding ground to do that, because you know from the start that you've got an incredibly receptive audience of fans that don't really kind of care who you are or who's in your film. If it's horror, they're going to kind of want to watch it, which is such an amazing kind of base to be playing with. But then you've kind of got to be sensible with what you're looking at. I mean, if you've kind of got an idea for a vampire film or something like that, look, there's got to be something new in there, right? Because everyone's seen a vampire film 100,000 times. You've got to look at your kind of a script from like a beat perspective, where, look, if you're doing something kind of schlocky and gory, that's fantastic. There'll be an audience where people lap that up. But if you don't get into that until page 45 of a 90-page script, then you're going to lose your audience in that first time. So you've got to know where. I mean, that's kind of, I think, an important role from a producer like myself that doesn't write, to kind of, and I hate it. I mean, I always sound like such an arsehole, because it's like, I can't write to save my life, yet someone will submit a script and I'm like, well, that's, you kind of need to do that. And it's like, who the hell am I to tell these people how to, do better writing when I can't do it myself? But I think it's important from a producer standpoint to kind of know how to maybe, suggest that people should amend their scripts to kind of include those top beats. Because, if you are pitching your script to somebody, an investor that has invested in films before, or if you're having kind of very early level distribution talks to maybe lock in pre-sales, that's going to be what they're looking for, because they're going to need to, the distributors will probably have a good insight into what their audience want. So you've got to kind of hit those beats. And I think, again, how many times I've spoken about this already, there's got to be that kind of that discourse level with anyone that's kind of having an input as to putting in money, where, yes, you can be that kind of guy. It's like, no, this is the script, this is it. If you don't want to put money in, sod you, I'll go and find it somewhere else. But in reality, there's got to be that kind of give and take. And I think, sometimes you do maybe have to bend to put something in your script to kind of appease them. And it's, I don't want to say that the writing process is really kind of collaborative, because that's probably not fair to writers, because they're having to do the hard yards of making it work. It's just, there's input from other people that, like me, that have the audacity to say, yeah, that's that, but can we do something else? I don't know what that is, but you figure it out. You're the writer. But it's that's incredibly important. And I think that's why if you're kind of working on a project like that, it's incredibly risky to actually kind of do what we did with Walking Against the Rain. And if we were going to do it again, I think we would do it differently, where you're spending hundreds and thousands of pounds on getting a product out there with perhaps no discernible market at the end. And it's just it's almost too risky. So yeah, I think having that kind of marketing head on knowing your audience from the very, very beginning and knowing where it's probably going to land. And, it's not something you can do, to an absolute T and expect it to kind of run how it does. I mean, some people do. I mean, studios like Blumhouse, people like that are incredibly good at that. They know what they're making at the beginning. You can see exactly what they're trying to kind of do and who they're trying to appeal to. And that's absolutely great. But, on our level where we can't do thousands and thousands of dollars worth of market research or stuff like that, where we're trying to kind of really kind of zero in on that, we have to make our best guess. And do you know what? That's absolutely fine. It's absolutely better than nothing. And it goes with things like, I mean, the most important piece of marketing you can do for an indie film is look at your festival strategy, right? I mean, that's where people will see your film for the first time. And I think it's important that when you are kind of either even if at the budgeting stage of your film, where it's like, okay, so we know what festivals we really think this is going to absolutely play and go down the storm at. Let's make sure that we're talking to them at the start. Maybe we're going to these festivals to try and get a relationship with the programmers. That's all incredibly important stuff, because again, you can make the best film in the world, but if there's no kind of buzz being built about it, if there's no one hoping to see it, or if there's no kind of buy-in from an audience, no one's going to see it, and that sucks. And I dread to think how many incredible films have been made, but because there hasn't been that kind of thought process about how you're going to bring it to market, never see the light of day, just because no one knows about them. And that's it's really, really sad. So I think if there was kind of a sort of almost like a soundbite to it, is just start marketing or thinking about how it's going to be brought from day one, even before, when your treatment's there and you've got a cool idea, then you kind of think about how it might roll out.
Yeah, absolutely. And also those discussions where you go, we need to put something in the first 15 minutes to keep people hooked.
Exactly.
You can have that discussion now, or you can read it in the reviews when people say the first 40 minutes is boring and I turned it off.
Yeah.
So it's that as a director, my wife gives me the feedback as my producer on the script. We have those discussions. It's taken me a long time to get to the point where I hear them from the place that they come from, rather than as a creative who's offended that my art's getting changed.
Well, that's it. And you only had to divorce her 3 times to get there.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
The end. But
I mean, we've had so many discussions about that, and it does take a while to get to that point where you can hear stuff.
It does
hear criticism. Yeah,
it does. But then I think filmmaking is such a collaborative process, right? I mean, you can't do it alone. And I think when you've kind of gone through it a few times, I think, again, I can't profess to say this, but I would like to think that a good writer would realize that there has to be that kind of that level of buy-in from your money men and your producers, and if you're not directing it yourself, your director as well. And it's never a slight on your writing. I think again, as a producer, you wouldn't even be talking to that writer necessarily if you didn't think they were a good writer and you didn't think it was a good project. It's just that kind of back and forth to try and kind of take what we think the writer might be trying to develop, and actually then it's not even put the kind of the final gloss on it to make it sellable. It's just to kind of make sure that we're doing all we can to kind of create the best package and the best product at the end of the day.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you'd like to hear from more industry professionals, how they got into the business and how you can do the same, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from movie sets around the world, then please do subscribe to the Honest Filmmaker podcast.